Samantha had always dreamed of moving to the city, leaving behind the quiet suburbs where she'd grown up. The opportunity finally came when she landed her dream job as a graphic designer at a trendy agency downtown. With her new apartment and a modern high-rise, she was ready to embrace the excitement of city life. Little did she know that excitement would soon turn into terror. The apartment was perfect, sleek, minimalist, with large windows offering a breathtaking view of the skyline. It was a far cry from her childhood home, but the independence thrilled her. On her first night, she opened a bottle of wine, sat on her balcony, and admired the city lights. The hum of distant traffic below was soothing, and for the first time in months she felt a sense of peace. The first week in her new apartment went smoothly. She quickly adjusted to the rhythm of her new life, commuting to work, meeting new colleagues, exploring the vibrant neighborhoods. But then on her second weekend in the city, something strange happened. It started with a knock on the door. Sam wasn't expecting anyone. She peered through the peephole but saw no one outside. Frowning, she shrugged it off. Maybe it was kids messing around. But then it happened again. 3 knocks, louder this time. Sam opened the door, her heart racing a little faster than she'd like to admit. The hallway was empty. She stepped out and looked both ways, but there was no one. Only the soft hum of the building's air conditioning system filled the silence. She walked back inside, locking the door behind her. That night, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every noise from the street seemed amplified. Every shadow outside her window seemed darker, more ominous. She drew the curtains, telling herself it was nothing. But deep down, her gut was telling her something was off. The next day at work, she tried to forget about the strange knocking. Her co-workers were friendly. The office was buzzing with creative energy, and it was easy to get lost in her projects. By the time she returned home, she had convinced herself that it had all been a prank. But when she arrived at her apartment door, she froze. There, lying on the welcome mat, was a single red rose. Sam stared at the flower, her heart hammering in her chest. She picked it up slowly, looking around to see if anyone was watching. But the hallway was as empty as before. She brought the rose inside, tossing it into the trash. That night, sleep came in fits. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined someone lurking outside her door, waiting, watching. A week passed and Sam tried to move on, but the knocking became more frequent. It happened at random times, early in the morning, late at night, even in the middle of the afternoon when she was home alone. Always the same. 3 sharp knocks followed by silence. Each time she opened the door, no one was there. And then one evening, something changed. She came home from work to find another rose on her doorstep. This time, however, there was a note attached. "I see you." Sam's blood ran cold. Her first instinct was to call the police, but what could they do? She hadn't seen anyone. There were no cameras in her hallway. It could be anyone in the building or even someone passing by. Feeling unnerved, she decided to stay with a friend for a few nights. But the notes kept coming. Every morning, she found a new one on her door. Each note was more unsettling than the last. "You look beautiful tonight. Don't try to hide from me. I'll see you soon." Sam was terrified. The once exciting and vibrant city now felt claustrophobic, its towering buildings closing in around her. She couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched even when she was surrounded by people. Desperate, Sam reported the notes to the building manager, hoping they could help. They agreed to keep an eye on the building, but there wasn't much they could do without any concrete evidence. They suggested she install a security camera outside her door. That night, Sam set up the camera and prayed that it would catch whoever was tormenting her. She spent the next few hours huddled on the couch, her curtains drawn tight, jumping at every little sound. Finally, exhausted, she fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, she checked the footage. At first, there was nothing, just hours of an empty hallway. But then, at around 3 a.m., the camera picked up movement. A figure, dressed in all black, appeared at her door. They knocked 3 times, just as they had before, and then they crouched down. Sam watched in horror as the figure placed another rose on her doorstep and stood there for a moment, staring at her door before slipping away into the shadows. Her heart pounded in her chest as she replayed the footage. Whoever this person was, they weren't just leaving random notes. They knew where she lived, they were watching her, and now they had made their presence known. Sam called the police, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. An officer arrived later that day, reviewing the footage and taking a report. But without a clear face, there wasn't much they could do. "We'll patrol the area more frequently," the officer assured her, but it was clear they didn't have much to go on. That night, Sam didn't sleep at all. For the next few days, Sam lived in a state of constant fear. She barely left her apartment, afraid that the stalker would be waiting for her. But staying inside wasn't any better. The knocking continued, the notes became more threatening, and every time she looked out her window, she swore she saw someone watching from the shadows. One evening, after another sleepless night, Sam decided she couldn't live like this anymore. She grabbed her phone and dialed her friend Emma. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm leaving. I'm going to stay at a hotel until I figure something out." Emma insisted on coming over to help Sam pack, and within an hour, they were throwing clothes and essentials into a suitcase. Sam couldn't wait to get out of the building to escape the suffocating feeling of being watched. But as they were about to leave, there was a knock at the door. Sam froze. The color drained from her face as she stared at the door, her heart racing. It was the same knock. 3 sharp raps just like before. Emma, sensing the fear in Sam's eyes, reached for the door handle. "Wait," Sam whispered, grabbing her arm. "What if it's him?" Emma hesitated but then steeled herself. "We can't hide forever, Sam." She opened the door slowly, and there, standing in the hallway, was a man. He was tall, with dark hair and a cold, emotionless expression on his face. In his hand, he held another rose. Before either of them could react, the man pushed his way into the apartment. Sam stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. Emma screamed, grabbing a nearby lamp and swinging it at the intruder. The man dodged the blow, but Emma's quick thinking gave Sam enough time to grab her phone and dial 911. The next few moments were a blur of chaos. The man lunged towards Sam, but Emma tackled him to the ground, her adrenaline surging. Together they fought to hold him down until the police arrived. When the officers burst into the apartment, they pulled the man off the 2 women and cuffed him. Sam was shaking, tears streaming down her face as she watched them take him away. As it turned out, the man had been living in the building for months, quietly stalking her from a distance. He had found out where she worked, followed her home, and became obsessed. The roses, the notes, the knocking, all part of his twisted game. But now it was over. Sam stood in her apartment, the fear that had once consumed her slowly fading away. She was safe. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. Still, as she packed her things and prepared to leave the apartment for good, she couldn't shake the feeling that, somewhere out there, someone else could be watching. For years, Claire and her husband, Daniel, had dreamed of moving out of the bustling city and into a quiet, peaceful neighborhood. After saving up for what seemed like an eternity, they finally found the perfect house. A beautiful 2-story Victorian-style home nestled in a serene, tree-lined street. The neighborhood was ideal, quiet, safe, and full of charm. The house itself was a dream come true. With its large windows, spacious backyard, and quaint wraparound porch, it felt like the perfect place to raise a family. Claire was already imagining summer barbecues, cozy winter nights by the fireplace, and the joy of finally having a place to call their own. After weeks of planning and packing, they moved in. The first few days were a blur of unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and getting to know their new neighbors. Everyone seemed friendly, welcoming them with warm smiles and offers of help. It was exactly the fresh start they had been hoping for. But on their 3rd night in the new house, something strange happened. It was late, and Claire was sitting in the living room, reading a book, while Daniel was upstairs finishing some work. The house was quiet, the only sound the occasional creak of the old wood floors. Claire was beginning to relax when she suddenly felt an odd sensation, as if someone was watching her. She glanced up from her book, her eyes drifting toward the large bay window that overlooked the street. At first, she saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the soft glow of the streetlights and the faint outline of the neighboring houses. But then, her heart skipped a beat. Standing across the street, partially hidden in the shadows, was a man. Claire squinted, trying to get a better look, but the figure remained still, almost blending into the darkness. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and seemed to be staring directly at her. She felt a chill run down her spine as she quickly closed the curtains, her heart pounding in her chest. "Daniel," she called, her voice trembling slightly. Daniel came down the stairs looking concerned. "What's wrong?" Claire hesitated, feeling a bit foolish. "I thought I saw someone outside, watching the house." Daniel peeked out through the curtains, scanning the street. "I don't see anyone," he said, his tone reassuring. "It was probably just someone walking by." Claire nodded, trying to convince herself that he was right. Maybe it had just been her imagination, or maybe it was just someone passing through the neighborhood. But deep down, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was wrong. Over the next few days, Claire tried to push the strange encounter out of her mind. Life in the new house resumed as usual, and she found herself getting lost in the excitement of decorating and making the space their own. But the feeling of being watched never quite left her. One night, as Claire and Daniel were getting ready for bed, they heard a strange noise coming from outside. It was a faint scratching sound, like something scraping against the walls of the house. Daniel shrugged it off, thinking it was probably a tree branch or a small animal. But the next night, the noise returned. This time louder, more persistent. Claire lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She listened intently, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be coming from the backyard, just outside their bedroom window. "Daniel, do you hear that?" she whispered, nudging him awake. Daniel groaned, still half asleep. "It's probably just the wind," he muttered, but Claire wasn't convinced. The noise didn't sound like the wind, and it definitely didn't sound like a tree branch. It was deliberate, almost rhythmic, as if someone, or something, was trying to get their attention. The next morning, Claire decided to investigate. She went outside and walked around the perimeter of the house, looking for anything that could explain the noise. But there was nothing out of the ordinary. No branches scraping against the house. No signs of animals. Still, the uneasy feeling lingered. A few days later, Claire went to check the mailbox. It was mostly junk mail and a few bills, but one envelope caught her eye. It was plain with no return address, and her name was written on the front in shaky, uneven handwriting. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with a short, chilling message. "I see you." Claire's heart raced as she stared at the note, her hands trembling. She quickly showed it to Daniel, who tried to reassure her that it was probably just a prank. "Maybe it's some kids messing around," he said, though even he seemed unsettled. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected to the figure she had seen outside. Someone was watching them, and now they were making their presence known. That night, she double-checked all the locks and made sure every window was securely closed. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had left the note was still out there, watching, waiting. The strange occurrences didn't stop there. A few nights later, Claire began receiving phone calls in the middle of the night. At first, she thought it was just a wrong number, but the calls became more frequent. Each time she answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end. "Hello?" Claire would say, her voice shaky. "Who's there?" But there was never a response. Just silence, followed by the sound of the caller hanging up. Claire became more and more paranoid. She started avoiding the windows, drawing the curtains tightly closed every night. She was constantly looking over her shoulder, convinced that someone was watching her every move. Daniel tried to comfort her, but even he was beginning to feel uneasy. The once perfect home they had dreamed of was now starting to feel like a prison. One night, as Claire was locking up the house, she heard a faint tapping sound coming from the living room. Her heart raced as she slowly walked toward the noise. It was coming from the window. With trembling hands, she pulled back the curtain, and there, staring back at her through the glass, was the face of a man. He was the same figure she had seen that first night, the one who had been watching her from across the street. His face was pressed against the glass, his eyes cold and emotionless, a twisted smile curling at the corners of his lips. Claire screamed, stumbling back in terror. By the time Daniel came running into the room, the man was gone. It was a quiet Friday evening when Sarah found herself home alone for the first time in months. Her parents had left for a weekend getaway, leaving her in charge of the house. At 17, she was more than capable of managing a few nights alone. In fact, she was looking forward to the peace and quiet, a chance to relax without her parents' constant nagging. After dinner, Sarah settled in on the couch with a bowl of popcorn, flipping through Netflix for something to watch. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but the old house had always creaked and groaned in response to the weather. She was used to it, or so she thought. Halfway through her movie, a sudden sound startled her. It was subtle, just a faint, almost imperceptible creak, but it sent a chill down her spine. It seemed to be coming from upstairs. Sarah paused the movie, listening carefully. Silence. She shook her head and chuckled to herself. It was probably just the house settling, or maybe the wind was pushing against the old wooden beams. Deciding to brush it off, she resumed the movie, trying to immerse herself back into the story. But she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. Every shadow seemed darker, every noise louder. Something was off, and Sarah's gut told her that she wasn't as alone as she had initially thought. As the night wore on, Sarah tried to ignore the strange noises echoing throughout the house. The wind had picked up outside, causing the trees to sway ominously, their branches scraping against the windows. Still, she reassured herself it was nothing more than her overactive imagination. Around 11 p.m., her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up and saw that it was her best friend Liz calling. Relieved for the distraction, she answered, laughing about how jumpy she had become being alone in the big creaky house. "Seriously, Sarah," Liz teased. "You've seen way too many horror movies. You're probably imagining things." I know, Sarah replied. "It's just, this place feels weird when I'm by myself. Every little sound makes me jump." They chatted for a while, with Liz reassuring her that nothing was wrong. Sarah started to feel a little better, convinced she had let her mind get the best of her. But then, just as they were about to hang up, Sarah heard a faint sound in the background of the call, like a soft, distant thud. "Liz, did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice suddenly serious. "Hear what?" Liz replied, confused. There was a noise like something hit the floor from upstairs. Liz was silent for a moment. "Maybe it's just your house settling again." "Yeah, maybe," Sarah muttered, though she didn't sound convinced. "I'll call you back later." After hanging up, Sarah sat on the couch, her heart racing. That sound hadn't been the house. It was too distinct, too deliberate. Swallowing her nerves, she grabbed her phone and stood up. Maybe she was just being paranoid, but she had to check it out. Sarah slowly made her way upstairs, her footsteps soft on the creaky wooden floor. The upstairs hallway stretched ahead of her, dark and silent, each door leading to a room she knew by heart. But tonight, they seemed foreign, as if she were walking through a stranger's home. She reached the end of the hall and opened her bedroom door. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The bed neatly made, her clothes folded on the chair, her desk lamp casting a soft glow over the room. She sighed in relief. Nothing was out of place. But then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The closet door. It was slightly ajar, just enough for a thin crack of darkness to spill into the room. She distinctly remembered closing it before going downstairs earlier. Her mind raced. Had she forgotten to close it? Or had someone else? Heart pounding, Sarah stepped toward the closet, her hand trembling as it reached for the door. With a deep breath, she yanked it open, only to be greeted by an empty space. No one was inside, just clothes and shoes hanging motionless on their hooks. She let out a shaky laugh, feeling foolish. "See?" she whispered to herself. "You're overthinking everything." But just as she turned to leave, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw an unknown number flashing on the screen. Frowning, she hesitated before answering. "Hello?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no response, just silence on the other end. Then, after a few seconds, a voice, deep, distorted, and far too close for comfort. "Why didn't you check the basement?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. Her breath caught in her throat as the words echoed in her mind. The basement. She hadn't thought about it. Why would she? She never went down there. It was old, musty, and filled with junk her parents had accumulated over the years. The thought of someone being down there, waiting in the dark, sent a wave of nausea through her. Her hands shook as she hung up the call and stood frozen in place. What was she supposed to do now? Call the police? Run? But what if it was just another prank? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but deep down, she knew. Something was wrong. Someone was in the house. Gathering her courage, Sarah crept downstairs. The basement door loomed at the far end of the hallway, partially obscured by shadows. She reached it slowly, every instinct in her body screaming at her to turn back. But she had to know. The door creaked as she pulled it open, revealing the narrow staircase leading into the darkness below. She fumbled for the light switch, and after a few flickers, the old bulb overhead sputtered to life, casting long shadows over the concrete steps. She took a deep breath and descended into the basement. The air was thick and stale, the faint scent of mildew clinging to every surface. Old furniture, boxes, and forgotten knickknacks cluttered the space, casting eerie shapes in the dim light. Sarah scanned the room, her heart thundering in her chest. There was nothing. No sign of anyone hiding. Maybe it had all been in her head after all. Just as she was about to turn back, she heard it. A soft shuffle behind one of the shelves. Her stomach dropped. Slowly, she approached the noise, her pulse pounding in her ears. She reached the shelf and pulled it aside, her heart racing. Behind it, crouched in the shadows, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, and shrouded in darkness. Before she could scream, the figure lunged at her, knocking her to the ground. Sarah scrambled to get away, but the intruder was faster, pinning her to the cold floor. Sarah fought with everything she had, kicking and thrashing beneath the intruder's weight. She felt her heart hammering in her chest, every beat a frantic plea for survival. She managed to free one hand and reached for the nearest object, a rusted metal pipe that had fallen from the wall. With a desperate swing, she connected with the intruder's head. The figure grunted in pain, momentarily loosening its grip. Sarah took her chance, wriggling out from underneath and scrambling toward the stairs. Her legs felt like lead as she stumbled up the steps, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the intruder was regaining his balance, his footsteps heavy and menacing as he began to follow her. She burst into the hallway, slamming the basement door behind her and locking it. Her mind raced. Where could she go? The phone. She had to call for help. Grabbing her phone from the kitchen counter, Sarah dialed 911 with trembling hands. The operator's calm voice on the other end was a lifeline, but the intruder was already pounding on the door, the wood groaning under the force of each hit. "Please hurry," Sarah begged into the phone, tears streaming down her face. "He's going to get in." The police arrived within minutes, but to Sarah it felt like an eternity. When they burst through the front door, guns drawn, they found her huddled in the corner of the living room, her body shaking with fear. The basement door had been smashed open, but the intruder was gone. The officers searched the house and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of him. Days passed, and though Sarah tried to move on from the horrifying ordeal, she couldn't shake the feeling that the intruder was still out there, watching, waiting for another chance. She moved out of her parents' house shortly after, unable to live in a place where she no longer felt safe. But the nightmares continued. Every night she dreamed of the figure lurking in the basement, waiting for her to come down. And every night she woke up with the same thought echoing in her mind. Why didn't you check the basement?